All right, let's take a look at section 5 of chapter 2. Here's the focus question. Whereas Virginia and Maryland quickly became societies dominated by a small aristocracy ruling over many bound laborers, New England colonial society evolved differently. Early New England was decisively shaped by the Puritans, a diverse group of English Protestants united by their belief that the Anglican Church retained too many of the practices and doctrines of the old Catholic Church. They mainly were Congregationalists who rejected the Catholic structures of religious authority that were retained in the Anglican Church, such as archbishops, bishops, and priests, and instead embraced independent local congregations that chose their own clergy, determined their mode of worship, and often listened to sermons by educated ministers and personally studied the Bible. Like many Anglicans, however, Puritans shared a hatred of Catholicism and celebrated England's greatness and devotion to liberty. As followers of John Calvin's theology, the Puritans believed God had predestined different groups of people, the elect, to be saved from damnation. No amount of good deeds or good works could save those not among the elect. When a minority of Puritans in England separated from the Church of England, some Puritans decided to emigrate to America in order to fully practice their Protestant faith away from the influence and control of the Anglican Church and the English government that enforced its rules. One leader of the Puritan emigrants who settled in Massachusetts Bay, John Winthrop, hoped to found a city upon a hill, where Puritans would reject natural liberty or action without restraints that he believed were typically practiced by the Irish, Indians, and bad Christians, for a moral liberty to do that only which is good, in which Puritans became free by accepting severe restraints on speech, religion, and personal behavior. The first, pardon me, the first Puritan settlers to America, the Pilgrims, were separatists who left the Netherlands in 1620, financed by private investors who were interested in establishing a trading base in North America. The Pilgrims wanted to settle in Virginia, but their ship, the Mayflower, was blown off course and landed on Cape Cod. Before the survivors of the journey established the Plymouth colony there, they drew up the Mayflower Compact, in which all adult male colonists agreed to obey just and equal laws enacted by representatives of their own choosing. This was the first written frame of government in what became the United States. Resting on the consent of all members of the colony, their government did not restrict voting to church members, and all land was held in common until it was divided up in 1627. In 1691, the independent colony became an official crown colony of England. Although earlier visits by Europeans had brought diseases that devastated the local Indian population, these Indians, including the notable Squanto, helped the Puritans at Plymouth survive their first winter by offering them food, a relationship celebrated at the first Thanksgiving in 1621. Chartered in 1629, the Massachusetts Bay Company was formed by London merchants hoping to further the Puritan cause and profit by trade with the Indians, and that year it sent emigrants who settled in the Massachusetts Bay north of Plymouth. By 1642, a great migration of 21,000 Puritans had flowed to Massachusetts Bay, though migration to New England dwindled soon thereafter. Compared to colonists in the Chesapeake, settlers in New England were older, more prosperous, and more religious. Fewer New England colonists were servants, and here women were just as numerous as men, resulting in more families than in the southern colonies. Although only a small fraction of migrants went to New England during the 17th century, by 1700 the white population was 91,000, larger than in the Chesapeake or the West Indies. Nearly all were descendants of those who crossed the Atlantic during the Great Migration. In New England, families and the patriarchal authority of the Puritan husband and father defined colonial society. These adult men controlled the labor of women and children in a farming society without large numbers of enslaved people or indentured servants. Though women were held to be spiritual equals to men and could become full members of the church, women were legally subservient to male authority in the home. The average New England woman married young, gave birth 7 times, and spent most of her life bearing and raising children. The Puritans feared excessive individualism and social disorder and organized themselves in small, compact, self-governing towns centered on a congregational church and eventually a school, which was mostly for reading the Bible, all surrounded by small houses and farming lots for individual families. The colony's government reflected this religious and social vision. The Massachusetts Bay Company's shareholders transformed their commercial charter into a government document. At first, they chose the colony's rulers, but in 1634, deputies elected by freemen, who were landowning church members, constituted a single legislature, the General Court. 10 years later, in 1644, company officers and elected deputies were divided into two legislative houses, and unlike in Virginia or Maryland, freemen were able to elect their governor. The principle of consent was central to all of Puritan life, including both church and state, but Puritan democracy, especially voting in colony-wide elections, was limited to members of the church, an ever smaller number as the colony grew over time. This was a hierarchical society in which families of social prominence were assigned the best land and most desirable seats in church. Divisions were also established in such areas as attire and language for addressing one another. Inequality was considered God's will. Some liberties applied to all, but separate ideas were applied to different groups, and the body of liberties allowed slavery, with the first enslaved person appearing in the records in 1640. Ministers were not allowed to hold office, but church and state were closely connected. Each town was required to have a tax-supported church. Church courts were not established, but the state enforced religious matters. Freedom of speech and assembly were provided for, but straying from prescribed religious behavior held severe consequences, including the death penalty. Puritans believed religious uniformity to be vital to social order and that the toleration of dissent disrupted that order. Religious liberty meant the liberty to structure society based on that notion. The desire of some congregations for local autonomy, however, soon clashed with notions of uniformity. The Wampanoags sought alliance with the Pilgrims to alter power relations in the region. The Wampanoags became intermediaries between the English and other native groups. English colonists who settled Massachusetts Bay established Boston and were recruited as allies and trading partners by local Indians. English attempts to convert Indians were minimal in the first 2 decades. Captivity narratives were published to discourage colonists from converting to Indian ways of life. As the white population of New England increased, so did tensions with the region's Indians. In 1637, colonists joined the Wampanoag and Mohegans in attacking the Pequots, a powerful tribe in southern New England that controlled the fur trade through an alliance with the Dutch. The English and their Indian allies attacked a Pequot village at Mystic, Connecticut, massacring more than 500 men, women, and children. The Pequots' defeat led to further white settlement in western New England and intimidated local Indians, but did not wipe out the Pequot. So, that's the end of Section 5. We'll go from there.